So the next topic of discussion is something called scope. And scope is another way of saying range or accessibility when we talk about programming. And what we're really talking about is variables. And what you see on the screen here is we've created two variables. And this is where we've always created our variables so far for this course. And they're always created just below the class line. It doesn't matter whether we're working in console or whether we're working in form. They're always just below the class line. You notice that they're not inside of any of these subprograms. It's not inside the click event subprogram. It's not inside display info. But because it's outside of these, but still inside the class, that means that these two variables, name and profession, can be used anywhere within the program. That is complete accessibility. And because it can be used anywhere, we say that these variables are global variables. Global variables. So variables that have a lifespan of the entire life of the program and are accessible anywhere within the program. Those are global variables. Global variables are not the only type of variables that we have in our programs. We already mentioned before, we talked about parameters. Parameters are parameters are temporary variables. Variables that have a short lifespan, they're only in existence for the lifespan of the subprogram during its execution. As soon as the subprogram is done, those variables are deleted. Another term that we use for temporary variables, or these temporary variables in this case, is something called a local variable. So a local variable is created within a subprogram, and it only has the lifespan of that subprogram. So when the subprogram is complete, it's deleted. You cannot access that data from anywhere but inside that subprogram. So if here I was to create a variable called, let's say, int age, and let's give it a value of 10, I could not go up here and say message box dot show age plus age. I'm going to get an error, and the reason I'm going to get an error because as far as C# is concerned, missing a semicolon. That's all right. Oh, that's not the error I was talking about. But as far as C# is concerned, the variable age does not exist. Age does not exist in the current context. It's not in the C# dictionary. Because age was created inside of display info, it is only accessible inside of display info. So what we see here is we see two versions of local variables. We have parameters, which are variables that are used as the data to be passed into a subprogram for the execution of the processing. And then we have just a regular variable that's created inside of the subprogram. And this is called a local variable as well. It's really the same idea. So let's do a quick little example just so you can see this. So I'm going to get rid of this int age so we don't confuse anything. And I'm going to create a subprogram, a very simple subprogram. This subprogram is going to calculate how old somebody is in years, roughly speaking. So I'm going to say private void display age. And display age is going to have two parameters. It needs to know what year the person was born in and what the current year is. So int birth year and int current year. So we've set up the contract, and the contract says that when we use this display age subprogram, we have to supply it with two integers, one for the birth year and one for the current year. So inside of here, I need to calculate that age for display purposes, because that's what this subprogram does. It displays the age. Well, to calculate that, I'm going to need to store that age somewhere. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a temporary variable, or a local variable, int age. Now you might be thinking to yourself, why don't you just create a global variable and just have all your variables up at the top? Well, the main reason is to conserve memory. Because remember that a local variable is only in existence for the lifespan of the subprogram. That means as soon as the subprogram is done, it's deleted, which means it essentially frees up that memory for other things. So if you're creating a computationally intensive program that uses a lot of graphics or something like that, uses a lot of resources, sometimes those little bits, bytes, and megabytes and kilobytes actually make a difference. So freeing up your memory is always important. So our goal should to be using local variables as much as possible and minimizing the amount of global variables we use. So if we can do it locally, we're going to do it locally. If we have to do it globally, then we'll have to do it globally. We don't make global variables just because it makes our lives easier. We use local variables because it makes our programs more efficient in the long run. Okay, so back to the task at hand. We're calculating the age. So I'm just going to create this age, and I'm going to say age is equal to the current year minus the birth year. And that is our age. Now we just need to display it on the screen because that's what this program is supposed to do, display age. And we'll do it in the form of a message box. Show age. Oops. Okay, now we got to get rid of this up here because this was giving us errors before, so we're just going to get rid of that. Now if we run our program, we'll see that nothing happens except for what happened before. Frank, the janitor, and then that's it. Nothing has actually called the code for display age yet, so we need to put that in there. So rather than displaying the info for now, I'm going to comment that line out. I'm going to display age. And it requires two pieces of information, birth year and current year. So let's say 1999 and 2014. So if we run our program right now, whenever we do call subprogram, we get age is 15. And we can call it 50 million times if we wanted to, because every time we call that subprogram, it's going to call the other subprogram, and it's just going to chain up and call everything that's needed to be done. Now this one isn't very flexible because right now we're just putting in actual literal values. We could use variables and have the user enter in those variables and add a little bit more flexibility to our programs if we'd like, but it's not necessary at this point because we're just doing a demonstration. So we have this subprogram called display age, and it uses local variables. We notice that it does not have a global variable for age because we don't need it to be a global variable for age. Again, we need to remember that this data, birth year and current year, are just copies of the data to be passed in. The 1999, 2014 are just going to be copied in there, just copied into the buckets. And that should be everything for variable scope.